You're listening to the Sticks and the Six podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, we could not be more excited to welcome our guest for today's episode. He is the longtime host of Derringer in the Morning, heard every day on Q107 in Toronto, as well as a longtime Maple Leafs fan. John Derringer, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time.
Hey, thanks a lot, boys. Nice to be here with you.
All right, so I want to come out guns blazing with a quick rapid-fire question here for you. Your Twitter bio says you're a soft pant enthusiast. So what's your go-to soft pant? Are you more of a track pants, sweats, PJ bottoms guy? What do you like?
I got to tell you, I'm a Roots guy and a Muskoka Bearwear guy. I think they both make an excellent product, and both of them, I got confused there in the early 2000s when we somehow went away from the elastic cuff and they started flaring your sweatpants.
Yeah.
And I didn't deal well with that era, but the now the classic elastic cuff Roots and Muskoka Bearwear, fine product.
Right on. There's your unofficial sponsorship from John Derringer. Geez, live on the show. All right. Sweet.
Peter, have at her.
Oh, okay. I thought that Alex was going in with his question. All good. So, John, Alex mentioned off the top, a lifelong Leafs fan. You've seen this team change throughout the years. You've seen the good, you've seen the bad, just like the rest of us. With this current team right now, what's one prediction that you have for the future, good or bad?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question and a tough question, because if anything, a lifelong love affair with the Leafs has taught me, it's that pretty well every prediction I've made has not come true. So, I think because so much of what we love about sports ends up being personality and people we can relate to. And I think it's really hard to cheer against Jack Campbell. So I would say Jack Campbell becoming and being treated and compensated like a first-rate starting NHL goaltender would be a prediction I'd stand behind and hope for as a fan of his as well.
This kind of goes off Peter's question, obviously. A tweet of yours from September 25th. Here we are watching the Leafs. I guess everything I said to myself after Game 7 was a delusional lie. And I was just reading some of the responses, and I mean, like, it's is this an illness being part of Leafs Nation? Because, I mean, you see the three of us here talking about them week in and week out. Is it an illness? Is it an addiction? What is it about Leafs Nation that keeps us coming back?
You know what? I think it's all of the above. It's definitely a sickness to a certain extent. I mean, I love watching games. I love going to games. I love everything about the Leafs on the ice and as a hockey team. But I'm also incredibly fascinated with the entire culture of the team. I spend a lot of time, as I'm sure you guys all do, on Leafs Twitter, probably to a pretty good extent, all following the same people, with exceptions here and there, and you get a sense of the relationship, the really demented relationship that we have with this hockey team, and whether it be one player being polarizing, it's Marner right now, it's been Willie in the past, you can go back to Larry Murphy and beyond, with that aspect of it. On the other hand, the way we shower with love whoever happens to be the person, at the time. Doug Gilmour, probably the best example I can think of in my life. Maybe Matt Sundin, who was, obviously a spectacular player as well. But, one of the things that I think back to, and I think there's also a really interesting interesting young versus old fan thing that happens to a fairly large extent. And again, with all generalities, there are tons of exceptions, but I find that there's a lot of, older fans tend to be looking for one thing, one style of play, one type of player. And young fans tend to see the team and what might make them a true contender something very different. And that comes down to various players and coaching and Dubas and the entire overall vision of where you want the team to go. So I find that part of it intriguing as well, because the investment we have in this hockey team, I can't tell you. I love the Green Bay Packers. I like the Raptors. Sure, they're our hometown team. I enjoy the Blue Jays. But there's no team that I have this sick relationship with, even close to the Leafs. And clearly there are millions of us across the country and really, I think, around the world who share the same malady. It's like it's its own virus.
Yeah, it's a toxic relationship for sure. I think that's one thing that old fans and new fans can all agree on is this can't be healthy. You actually kind of perfectly teed up my question earlier on there. So Mitch Marner, 4 games into the season, and Leafs Nation is just an absolute shambles over this guy. And everybody seems to have a different opinion on this guy. So we figure if we're talking to you right now, we might as well get you to give your opinion and your take on Marner. So obviously, looking back to the playoffs in the first 4 games of the season, he's seen better days. Do you think that this is something that fans and maybe the team should be concerned about, or is it just one of those things where it's a young player going for a rut and he'll get out of it eventually?
Well, the way I felt about it after Game 7, like for the next day or two after that, is a little bit different than the way I would feel about it today, because I think, like a lot of fans, I was deeply disappointed in his play throughout the series. And that was, it was tough to watch. And now looking at the start of a new season and not getting off to a particularly great one, you can see why there are so many people who are so hard on him. But there's also been, and again, going back to all the guys this has happened to before, there was that whatever moment where it just shifted, and you could kind of feel it, right? You could kind of get a sense that, wow, Marner's taken on a really negative connotation that he never had before, and you can really feel it, moving in that way. Not to suggest that he doesn't have a ton of defenders, because clearly he does. So looking at it, trying as a Leaf fan as much as you can look at things reasonably, and without your heart so much in it as your hockey head or your eyes, whatever it happens to be. You want the guy to do well. I can't find myself cheering against him, but I think he's in a situation too where if this gets into his head, and I don't know whether he's the kind of guy that would be overly interested in what's being said about him. But if he is, and it's something that would get into his head, then I think there's a chance it would last a lot longer than the 4 games it has so far.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there that, there are obviously some fans that are a lot harder on him than others, but I think we all definitely share the common, theme that we want to see him do well. He's the Toronto-born, homegrown star, and we've seen what he's capable of in the past. And it's obviously he's been in a little bit more of a negative spotlight. I think going back to even when he signed his contract extension, because before that, money wasn't even a topic of discussion when you were talking about Marner. So certainly hope for his sake and for the team's sake that he can get out of his own head, because he is his own worst enemy, I think.
Well, and one of the things that is said a lot that I tend to agree with is that, especially in the markets, and they're just by definition, the important markets where the fans are really, really invested, too much pressure gets placed on players simply because of the hard cap. right? We wouldn't care so much if it was 1999 and you could spend whatever you wanted, right? If you had, the money and the ownership behind you. And it's because of the cap that the expectations just become ludicrous.
Yeah, there was talks about something about like seeing something. I believe it was Alan Walsh alluding to maybe having a soft cap similar to that of the MLB, where you do have a bit more free reign and not as much limit as to what you can spend on your free agents. And again, you touched on this as well with William Nylander before. I mean, this is a player who was in the same situation as Mitch Marner and probably still is. You either love him or you hate him. You have your diehard fans and you have those that just despise him for whatever reason. But right now, this year, ever since the playoffs, we're seeing a different William Nylander. We're seeing his presence on and off the ice. He's becoming more of a leader, more vocal. Is this the William Nylander that maybe we didn't expect, but we're seeing his best and truest potential form right now?
Well, yeah. And you know what? I think since, as you say, the beginning of the playoffs, especially last year, you can sense the same way things kind of went negative with Marner, they went positive simultaneously with Nylander, right? Yeah. And you don't hear the Floatlander as much, or the, trade Willie, right? We can't wait to get rid of this guy. Yeah. You don't hear that near as much. And, so when you take the temperature, it's been an interesting shift between both of the players, right? They've kind of taken each other's places when it comes to the, being polarizing to fans, where, yeah, I'm really impressed with the way that Willie has played. And I'll tell you something, and I don't mind saying this, because look, I'm by no means an expert. I'm just a guy who's a hockey fan and loves the team. But our eldest daughter, who is 18, just absolutely loved the team. And when she was 13, 14, I took her to the Easter Seal skate. And at that point, like so many teenage girls, she was absolutely in love with Willie Nylander. And so when we got on to the ice, and he and the rest of the team were out there, she got very emotional because he was her first big, kind of celebrity crush, and the guy could not have been more awesome with her. As a father, you go, if somebody treats my daughter that way, they just automatically are going to get my respect. So we met him again a second time, and he was just as cool the second time as he was the first time. So my impression of Willie has always been clouded by that. He can do no wrong in our family. And so I'm really impressed with the way that he's playing right now. And, I hope that once, Matthews now being back, had some great moments last night, if not the results, now the pressure comes off Tavares and Willie, and we have, hopefully something new to look at for, offensively with the first two lines.
A little bit more cap conversation. One of the biggest talking points of the NHL this offseason and this season was the defensive market. And one guy that obviously we're focused on in Toronto is Morgan Rielly. And this being a contract year, is this a guy that, he's obviously been with us for, the lowest of the lows. He's the longest tenured Leaf right now. And now he's, experiencing some playoff hockey. But with the market the way it is he a guy that the Leafs can retain, or are we likely to see a guy like him leave?
Wow, another tough question, because you're right. He was there in the disaster of 2013, right? He was a rookie, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Of course, I'd love to have him stay. But I think we kind of, what we saw with Hyman was just the reality of where the team is at cap-wise. That, hey, what fan wouldn't have loved Zach Hyman for what he gave us? But when you looked at the numbers, you go, okay, and the term, you go, I understand why they said, enjoy Edmonton. And with Morgan Riley, yeah, I'd love to have him on the team. With all the problems that the team has had, and we all know what they've been in the last few elimination games, especially. He hasn't been a particularly huge one. So, I'll tell you, to go back to just the idea of the sick relationship. After they lost Game 5 against Montreal, I would have bet everything we own they were going to lose that series. And I know I wasn't alone in that. But it wasn't just a feeling or being kind of I'm a bummer Leaf fan, right? It was like, no. I am 100% convinced they are going to lose this series. And then I would have gone to Loan Sharks after Game 6 and gotten money from Loan Sharks and bet that they were going to lose Game 7. And as it turns out, I wouldn't have gotten my legs broken. I would have made a few bucks. But that's just right. You don't have that. Because we've been let down so many times, we keep on confirming our very worst nightmares over and over and over again. So that's why it would be really, really tough for me to come up with a team prediction for this year, because I kind of already know what it is. I know what that prediction will be in April.
Right? You almost go into the season and every series kind of expect the worst, and if they surprise you, well, then shit, you're kind of in a good spot at that point.
Well, and the funny thing is, how old are you guys?
I'm 33.
22.
30. Okay.
In the mid-20s, yeah.
Mid-20s. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Late.
You wouldn't remember the 2000-2001 Battle of Ontario, and
I do.
Okay, so there's one, and then 93, 94, probably not. Right?
Not as much. Not as much.
So,
yeah,
no, yeah.
I have the replays on Leafs TV for that.
Yeah, well, that's where again that probably also feeds into the difference between the way somebody in their 20s sees the team and the way somebody in their even 40s and certainly 50s and 60s would see this team, because you're adding essentially another 2 decades of disappointment, right? with the worst ownership in close to in sports history in Harold Ballard, right? But the flip side of that is, and I wish I could explain it. It's kind of like trying to get somebody to hear Led Zeppelin for the first time again. You only get to hear it once, right? You don't get to hear anything for a second time for the first time. That's it, right? And sometimes that's an indelible memory in our heads. And for a generation of fans, that 1993 spring, and a couple of the springs, whatever years they were, 99, 2000, 2001, the Curtis Joseph, Eddie Belfour with Mats as captain teams that went deep to conference finals. Those springs have been the best springs of our lifetimes, right? I couldn't explain to somebody who didn't live them in Toronto, what this city is like when the Leafs are in a conference final, right? And it's such a shame that it's been, close to 20 years since that's happened. I guess it has been 20 years, 17 since the, winning around. And that part of it too, I think really, really does play into the generational difference in the way that we see the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, it's another point that comes up, and I think it's a very valid one, that, that history, that bad history of the Leafs, that's not this current bunch of players' problem, and it's not Dubas's problem, and it's not Shanahan's problem. They're not responsible for the Harold Ballard years. But that's easy to say to somebody who did live through those years, right? So I find and I'm surprised, and maybe somebody will prove me wrong, but I'm actually really surprised that nobody's ever written a book about the psychology of the Toronto Maple Leaf fan. Because I think it's as fascinating as any relationship that I've ever had in my life.
I would say the closest thing to that would probably be his name's going to come to me. Steve Dangle's autobiography that he wrote about being a Leaf fan.
Yes.
That would probably be the closest thing to it. But I agree. I think there should be a book out there about the psyche, because I just started watching the All or Nothing Amazon Prime series today. And I mean, I put it off for as long as I could, because I know the result, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want to be that fly on the wall. You want to know what was going on in their heads. You want to, it is a sickness. It absolutely is a sickness. And my 17-month-old already has 2 Leaf jerseys, and I will not be slowing that down either.
No, hey, I sat and watched it and hoped for a different ending at certain points. Like I actually convinced myself that I didn't know how it ended.
Just for the record, and on the topic of making predictions, last season just this past season heading into the playoffs, I predicted the Leafs to win the Cup. And I'm not one of those Leaf fans that makes that prediction every year and says, this is our year, we're going to win it this year. Like I always make a very educated guess every year. And last year was the first time that I ever predicted the Leafs to win the Cup, because I was like, they've got the easiest path. They've had no problems with Montreal all year. They've had no problems with either Winnipeg or Edmonton. And then, that's a conference final run right there. Like, that would be enough to satisfy me for now, at least. And just seeing how that played out, I'm never making a prediction ever again. It's just not happening.
No, I don't blame you. It's a mug's game trying to do that with this team. And there were some things last year probably in most of the games, and same with the Columbus series and Boston before that, where, we have different definitions, I think, about, inside of a certain context, what wins playoff hockey games. And, the various levels of toughness are required according to different fans. But I think at the end of it, it's not so much the physical toughness. It's certainly not whether you can win fights, because they don't happen in the playoffs. It's about, do you more often than not come up with loose pucks? And are you willing to do, with the refereeing the way it is in the playoffs, are you willing to do what's necessary to come up with loose pucks? And then the other thing is goaltending. Yeah. If you have those two things and you're coming up with the puck and possessing the puck because you're working at getting the puck and making sacrifices, and if you're willing to make those sacrifices, come up with the puck, and you're getting great goaltending, you got a chance every year. And I just think that this team is still a step away from that. We'll find out about the goaltending, because Jack Campbell was the first one to say how much he wanted back that Gallagher goal in Game 7, right? Should not have gone in. That can't go in a Game 7. Love the guy. Jack, you're amazing. Love you. Hope for your future. That goal can't go in a Game 7. And he knew it. So you do that, and you do the necessary work. And we all know, right, the game is so different in the playoffs that it really does become a matter of sacrifice, because you know how much isn't going to get called. So you got to want that disc more than the next guy. And there's a pretty good chance, as you get deeper into the playoffs, that guy really wants it too, right? It's what makes the game great.
Yeah. So another question I got here for you, John, and I get the impression that people hate being asked this, but I got to ask you just out of sheer curiosity. You brought up your little interaction with William Nylander there before, and I just have to know, as a radio host in the mecca of the hockey world, as Austin Matthews called it a few years ago, I was just wondering if you had any cool interactions with players or coaches or anything like that you'd like to share that maybe stick out in your mind.
We've been fortunate enough to go to a couple of practices over the years and see them at I think it's the Ford Center now, right? MasterCard Center in Etobicoke. And we've also gone to a good and dear friend of mine Kevin Collins runs Easter Seals Ontario and has for a long time, and they do the Easter Seal skate every year. So we've been participating in that for a long time. And, I think one of the things that you see in Toronto, and I don't have anything to compare it to in other markets, but I think that it quickly becomes apparent when you put on that sweater, what this franchise means to people. This is not Arizona, right? I mean, and that with that comes good and bad. And we know the way that works, right? But I don't think you see that sort of thing in many other markets, and the reverence that people have. And I think every player that I've seen has treated fans and us respectfully and well. And I think that's a reasonable expectation, because as far as I know, like at the Easter Seal skate, like the entire team shows up. So, you can only imagine what it's like to meet Austin Matthews for kids. And I think and over the years, there have been lots of guys who have, one of the great examples has been Wendell Clark, right? I mean, Wendell totally embraced the Toronto Maple Leaf fan, right? And Wendell, for anyone who's been lucky enough to have dinner with them or, go out to an event that Wendell's at and involved in, he's answered the same questions 2 million times, but he answers them as nicely the 2 millionth time as he did the first time, right? I can't imagine how many times Wendell's told the same stories, because people want to hear them and are so deeply engaged with the guy. So he understood, I think, from a very early time after he got here, the relationship with Toronto Maple Leaf fans. And I think it's important to note too that when he was playing in Toronto, he took a lot of heat. It was different heat because there was no Twitter or anything like that. But he did take a lot of heat because injuries was part of it, and therefore wasn't producing because he was soft, right? Because he was injured. And now you look back and you go, people were calling Wendell soft, but they were at the time. So he didn't get a free ride either. But he kept the relationship and, is Mr. Toronto Maple Leaf of his generation for a very, very good reason. And one of the things that I've found over the years, and especially, doing the morning show at the Fan for 5 years, was that it's much, much different and much more entertaining dealing with retired hockey players than current hockey players, right? Like they try to limit the personality and the information that they give as much as possible when they're playing. And then when they're not, you start to hear more of the truth and about the way they see things. And so for sure, some of the best stories I've heard are from guys who, we're not talking about what's happening today, but what they did 10 or 15 years ago. Now they don't mind talking about it.
There you go.
John, I just want to ask you a quick question about the fact that something popped up on Twitter about, a former Maple Leaf fan favorite, Darcy Tucker, giving a very good, solid seal of approval to that of newcomer Michael Bunting in his play. I just want to get your take on that. And is that sort of like, the old generation, or like passing the torch on to this new age, new era generation that's coming up, or even for like future players to come in?
Yeah, and you know what? Darcy Tucker's another guy who understood Toronto, understood what Toronto Maple Leaf fans wanted, created and cultivated an excellent relationship with the fans, and now is in a position where, when he says that about Bunting, knowing that Bunting's going to hear it, it's like, wow, that is indeed a seal of approval. And, I would think in just about every market, you would have guys who have reached a certain stature and whose opinion and whose words mean more than pretty well anywhere or anyone else. But in Toronto, there are quite a few of those guys, and Darcy Tucker would certainly be one of them. And one of the reasons for that is another one of the many things I've always been fascinated about with the team And that is, we love a certain kind of toughness and tenacity. And we always have, Tucker, Ty, Domi, you name it, going back generations. And we love that in our hockey players. We don't require it in much else in our lives, right? Nobody describes Toronto as a tough town, right? Toronto, tough town. No, that's not what people say about Toronto. They say lots of stuff, good and bad, but we're not considered like a Philadelphia or Gary, Indiana, right? I mean, it's just a Flint, Michigan. No, Toronto. But that's what we want in our hockey players. And there's a guy named Kevin Shea, and Kevin is an old friend from the record business who ended up working with the Hall of Fame for many years and has written a number of books on the Leafs. And he told me that even though he scored the huge overtime goal in 1951, that Bill Barocco was loved as a Toronto Maple Leaf for the same reason that guys like Darcy Tucker was when he played. And that is toughness, that I'm not backing down mentality, going into the corners, doing the work that other players may not want to do. So even back in the late 40s and early 50s, we valued that in Toronto, and we always have. And so for a guy like Michael Bunting to get that from Darcy Tucker really does mean a ton. It means a ton to Leaf fans. It means a ton to his credibility. And I've liked the way he's played so far. Have you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
I was high on that signing right from the moment it happened, and I'm happy to say I'm not going to jump to any conclusions 4 games into the season, but I'm happy to say that so far it's looking good. So,
yeah,
I was going to say he's rookie of the year, but I'm not going to say that just yet.
Easy, Peter.
almost like Brian Burke was onto something when he brought up truculence many years ago, right? Just get that toughness into the lineup. I'm glad you actually brought up Kevin Shea. I met him at the Ultimate Leaf Fans basement a few years back. Great guy, Kevin. But John, I've got 3 kind of quick hit questions for you. Obviously, behind me, you can see I love my memorabilia. I'm a big guy for getting those signed jerseys and those signed sticks and all that. Do you have any memorabilia? And if so, what would be your favorite piece? Along with that, I'm going to throw in, we talked on our last show about goal songs. And if we had individual goal songs, you're a music guy, what would your goal song be? And finally, ode to former Leaf great Phil Kessel, are hot dogs a sandwich?
Oh, no, first of all, most important first, hot dog's a hot dog. It's a hot
Thank
dog.
you.
Yep.
It does not need to be described any other way. Sorry, what was the second question?
Goal song, personal goal song if you were to be playing for the Leafs.
You know what? I thought about it the other day, and we actually played it on our radio show the other morning. And when I first started the beginning of the song, it starts off kind of slowly with an acoustic guitar, but at the end, it's got an amazing little piece. It's Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel, and it goes boom, 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 my heart going boom, 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 and I would just want boom, boom, boom over and over. So just loop it. Boom, 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 boom,
Perfect.
boom.
Better than my wheels on the bus.
That's right.
And the first one was?
Yeah, the first one. Any memorabilia, and if so, what would your favorite piece be?
Yeah, you know what? Never really been much of a collector, so I really don't have much to collect. Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leaf fan, as you said. So I met Mike a number of years ago. He invited us. I do a thing every year called the 13 Days of Christmas, and it's a fundraiser that we've done since 2003 for an organization called Abuse Hurts, which is for, anybody who has been abused, but largely women, children, victims of domestic abuse for the most part. And so we were doing this I guess it's got to be 5 or 6 years ago now. And Mike and his wife, Deb, they offered to have a bunch of people bid on coming down into their basement, which, as you know, is pretty awesome, or was in their old house. And, we do an auction, and a wonderful couple who lived not far from us, actually, in Aurora, they ended up being the bidders. And we had this amazing night down in the Forbes. Are you the only guy who's been there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So his basement was like his incredible Toronto Maple Leafs, like truly a museum, right? Mm-hmm. Stuff like the old dressing room door from Maple Leaf Gardens, and like a ridiculous amount of stuff. So you when you saw it, you kind of went, okay, because he took a lot of grief about the name Ultimate Leaf Fan, right? People were like, no way, man, I'm the Ultimate Leaf Fan. But you could see why he has a claim to the title when you see his basement. So anyway, he ended up writing a book about his 1 year on the road with the team. So 3 years ago, he went to every game of the season, starting in October, and then going right through to, it was the Boston series, so right through to the end of the first round of the playoffs. But he went to every single game of the season, home and road. So he wrote a book about it, and then he and his publisher asked me, it was about a little over a year ago, if I wanted to read the audio book for it, which I did, which was, kind of cool because Mike's a friend, and it was all about the Leafs. But one of the things, because I, became a little more close to the book, was during his travels across, Canada and the United States with the Leafs. It really is an incredible community of fans in every market in the league. And some of them are huge, like Vancouver. There's a ton of Leaf fans in Vancouver. All the Canadian markets. But then even the ones that you might not think of, like Anaheim, the number of people who, go to every year's Leaf game in Anaheim because they're still devoted to the team 3 time zones away. And I'm sure there will be in Seattle too, right? I mean, it's just this thing. Part of it's because Toronto's a big city, and, a lot of people have done really well elsewhere in North America and have been, from Toronto. And that's great for the city, but it's also spread Leaf fans, everywhere. And, we all laugh when you see a game in Edmonton or Calgary or Vancouver, or certainly Ottawa or Buffalo, where there's more Leaf fans than there are of the home team. And that's got to be like the most demoralizing thing in sports, right? Being an Ottawa Senator fan, and there are more fans of the road team in the building than there are for your home team. That's a tough one.
Yeah. That was how I felt this year watching the Jays play their home games at Salem Field, and all the Yankees fans would show up and outnumber the Jays fans there. That was, I watched that and I was like, I know where these Ottawa fans are coming from now. I don't like this at all. All right. Well, John, this has been great. We've had an awesome time chatting with you tonight. I do have one more question for you. So you correct me if I'm wrong. You used to host Jock and Roll, which you would interview musicians and athletes, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So obviously that was a little bit before my time, but my two biggest passions are music and sports. So it piqued my interest a little bit. And I have to ask, if you could pick one athlete and one musician all time to interview, who would they be?
Do they have to be alive?
No, anybody.
All time. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so the athlete, I would have to say, for not just phenomenal talent, but I think the guy would be just unreal to spend some time with, Babe Ruth.
There you go.
Interesting. That would be awesome.
The man knew how to live, right? Like he was the 1920s in a lot of ways, right? In a legendary decade that gave us, so much. There wasn't anything bigger than the 1927 Yankees, and he was, of course, the linchpin. And the guy could just go, right? He was a gamer his whole life, and it was a fascinating story. You know, he had been essentially abandoned as a child, and his dad was a bar owner in Baltimore, and he grew up with this great need to be loved and to be accepted. And he had a tremendous fondness for children, particularly underprivileged children, throughout his whole career. Now, he also loved the ladies, believe me, but he was a very complicated guy who was, you know, from everything that I can gather, either the greatest baseball player of all time or very, very close to it. So yeah, I think he would be really fascinating. And the other one, only because it would be impossible to be any more naturally cool or talented, for that matter, Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix and Babe Ruth in the same room would be pretty awesome.
Imagine that.
That would be a very great dream come true.
John, Babe, and Jimmy take Q107.
I met a guy years ago at a golf tournament, and he was one of the police officers who escorted Jimi Hendrix from Pearson downtown after he was busted for heroin possession at the airport. He was coming in and they found a reasonably small amount of heroin on him, and so he was arrested. And this guy was one of the cops that had to take him downtown. And he said, you know, I was just doing my job. I had to do but he said, from that day forward, I have never, ever met a person cooler than that guy was. So here's a guy in the back seat of the vehicle, right, on heroin possession charges, and the cop was just like, I can't believe how cool this guy is. So, yeah, Jimmy and Babe.
Wow.
I think the Jimi Hendrix story was better than the Babe Ruth one.
Yeah, 100%. I was just going to say, I couldn't imagine. I feel like you've reached a certain point in life when you get arrested and the police officers in the front seat marveling at how cool you are. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right. Well, John, we're not going to take too much more of your time. I know you've got an early morning tomorrow. So again, just wanted to thank you for hopping on Sticks in the Six, and thanks for taking time out of your night to join us and chat Leafs. We'd love to have you back sometime.
No problem. Alex, Peter, Forbes, thank you so much, guys. Really good talking to you. And if you ever want to do it again, you know how to get a hold of me.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
Take it easy.